This is a configuration guide for the newly released VeloctiyOne flight yoke and throttle from Turtle Beach for Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is part 1 of a 2-part series. If you'd like to know more about the VeloctiyOne flight controller for Xbox and PC, then check out my video, link in the notes below. This video applies equally to the Xbox and the PC setup. Part 2, however, will be separate videos, one for the Xbox and one for the PC. The reason for this is, although the default configurations are much the same, the way that we would save profiles will vary. This is the PC and it's shown as 2 separate units, yoke and quad, whereas in the Xbox version of Microsoft Flight Simulator, it's displayed as a single unit, quad and yoke combined. A warm welcome to the Simhanger. My name's Mark, thanks for watching and let's get started. In this video we'll be configuring the common elements that will apply to all the profiles, and so our main focus will be on the yoke. In part 2 we'll be finishing off our profiles for different types of aircraft, and we're going to be creating a new profile starting from scratch. Here for example we're in the single prop profile, but I'm in a twin prop aircraft. Because of the way it's configured, I can move my throttles, prop and mixtures all together, using the throttle levers on the top of the unit. However, the 3 linear or vernier levers are also configured within the same profile, so I can use throttle 1, prop 1, mixture 1, etc. as well. And this can be confusing. It's one general profile trying to cover all different types of aircraft, as well as configurations for navigating round the menus. In this series of videos, we're going to create a simpler and easier to follow set of profiles to cover most aircraft. In this video I'll be creating the new profile on the Xbox. PC users can follow along. The only thing to note that some of the axis and button numbers are different on the PC compared to the Xbox. With your VeloctiyOne flight controller you would have received the wall chart, and you can use this to cross-reference that you're doing it correctly. So for example, if we're configuring the roll axis on the Xbox, it'll show L axis 4. If you're configuring on the PC, you would expect to see L axis X. Hope I've explained that clearly enough. But for now, let's get on with it. Select a simple single-engine aircraft. I recommend the Cessna 152. Escape to your menus, and then we want control options. Select that. And once in the submenu, select the VeloctiyOne flight. It doesn't matter what profile you're on really. And now we're going to select the preset manager. Click on that. And here we have 2 options. The first is to create a new profile, and the second is to duplicate or copy an existing one. Select new. It's come up with a suggested name, but I want to change that. And as you can see, I'm naming my profile the VeloctiyOne Flight Yoke Basic. Under the VeloctiyOne Flight, this profile is now shown as active. And make sure your filter is on assigned. And because we chose a new profile, there is nothing assigned. It's a completely empty configuration. And now we're ready to start. First step is to now change the filter to all, and for ease of navigation make sure the menus are collapsed. We're going to choose flight control surfaces and then primary control surfaces, as we're going to configure the yoke movement. Start off with, we're looking for elevator or pitch axis. Select the box next to elevator axis, and this will bring up our mappings configurator. Click to start scanning and then move the peripheral in the relevant direction. And it's picked up the movement, joystick L axis 3. Happy with that? Validate. Now we can see that elevator axis is to joystick L axis 3, and we can test it by moving the yoke in and out. That's done. Let's now go and configure the roll or aileron axis. Select the box, once again start scanning, and then move the axis on the peripheral. It picks it up as joystick L axis 4. I'm happy with that, so once again validate, and there it is. We can now quickly do a quick check by moving through the aileron or roll axis. Elevator axis is working, all good so far. Let's go on and do our rudders. And once again we click in the box opposite rudder axis, and then start scanning. Just a note at this point that I'm assuming you're not using rudder pedals. If you were, you would skip this step as you already have them configured. This is assuming you're using the default VeloctiyOne flight configuration of the left and right triggers. Whilst it's scanning, press any one of the triggers and it picks it up. And validate, note it treats these triggers as an axis. You only need to configure one to get both. And they seem to be working fine, both left and right. So I've got elevator, aileron and rudder configured. I'm happy with that. Apply and save, and now I'm going to pop back to the sim just to check that it's working. And straight away you'll notice I've got a problem. Elevator axis is reversed, roll axis is fine. But that's quickly corrected. Back to my control options. I'm still under my yoke basic profile, that's good. Primary control surfaces, and I'm going to untick the reverse axis on the elevator. Apply and save, and back to the sim. Let's give it another test. That's better. Physical movement of the yoke is matching the movement of the yoke in sim. I'm happy with that, and the roll axis is operating as it should. Let's do a quick check on the rudder pedals. Left button and right button. Yep, that all seems good as well. It's always good practice to do a few changes and then pop back into the sim to make sure that it's worked. So we correct any issues as we go. We're now going to go on and configure the bumper buttons, left and right buttons, that are positioned above the triggers. The triggers we've already configured to the rudders. We will also go on and configure the left-hand buttons, which is B1, HAT1 and POV1. So we head back to our control options menu and our VeloctiyOne flight. Make sure the profile is the one we've just created. And as we're going to be adding more functions, change the filter to all. And we're going to be configuring the left and right buttons to our brakes. Rather than page through all the menus, there's often a quicker way, which is search by name. And here I'm going to type in brakes. And as the filter is set to all, it brings up everything related to brakes in the search function. I'm going to choose the left brake first of all. You know the drill by now. And I press the left bumper button. But I've accidentally bumped the yoke, so this is an error. This is very easily cleared. And do this if you make a mistake or press a wrong button. Simply go down to Clear Current Input and then click in the scanning box once again. Now being more careful, I'm going to press the left bumper button. There we are, joystick 5. Validate. My left brakes are done, and now for my right brakes. Once again scan, press the right button. On the Xbox it's button 6 and validate. I should now have brakes. Don't forget to clear the search by name box. Let's carry on with the configuration, so we'll change the filter to all. And this time we're going to set up a number of camera options. And within the camera options there are various different modes: cockpit, external, drone and so on. Here's an important point to note. The same button can be assigned to multiple functions provided those functions are in different modes. We're going to start by configuring our POV to some quick views. First of all, quick view right. Scroll down under cockpit camera till you find it, click the box, and I'm going to push my POV button to the right. And in the scanning box it comes up with joystick POV right. Validate that. And now let's do the left, a quick view to the left. And we follow exactly the same process. This time pressing the POV to the left. And once again validate. We could, if we wanted to, select quick view rear and quick view up, but I personally don't use these very often. So for my POV up and down functions, I'm going to choose a different view. One I think is more useful in the cockpit. So if we just page down a little bit, we'll come to next pilot position and previous pilot position. For my POV1, I'm going to select next pilot position. I'm going to scan, press the button, and it comes up as POV up and validate. And for my down POV, I'm going to choose the previous pilot position. Press the POV down, it registers, and then validate once again. And once we do a test, I'll be able to show you the benefit, perhaps, of having this configured this way. So my POV1 is now configured, and now I'm going to configure the left-hand button, marked B1. I'm staying in camera mode, but I'm going to collapse the menus so I can find what I'm looking for quickly and easily. What I'm looking for is camera mode switches. And here I'm going to configure the button for the cockpit external view mode. So when I hit the button, I can alternate between the external and cockpit view quick and easy. Depending on your preference, of course, you could configure it for the drone mode if you wanted to. I prefer to use my Xbox controllers for that mode. We've already configured our POV1 in camera cockpit mode. I'm going to stay in external camera, so that's the different mode to cockpit camera, and I'm going to assign some quick views. And as I've changed mode, I can use the same buttons. I'm going to start with the external quick view up, and I'm going to press the POV up. It registers, but note it brings up a warning message that this is already configured. In this case, we're okay with that, so we can go ahead and validate, because the other assignment is in a different mode. I'm now going to assign quick view right. Another warning message, but we're okay with that. And now quick view left. And finally, we'll be having a look at quick view rear, which in effect is giving us a head-on view of the aircraft. Once again, the warning message will pop up, but we know about that. We can continue. My external quick views are now set up. We're finished with the POV, and it's now time to turn our attention to the Hat1 switch. And here I'm looking for instrument views, again under camera. Microsoft Flight Simulator has some default instrument views that are very useful. Now I'm going to use hat up and down for these. Firstly, toggle instrument view 1. And I'm going to press the hat switch up, which will register on the Xbox as button 23. I'll validate that. And now for hat switch down, I'm going to choose next instrument view. Scan in the box, press the hat switch down, it registers, and then validate. So all I'm left with is the hat switch left and right function. And for that I'm going back to the main menus and then flight control surfaces again and control trimming surfaces. And I'm going to use the left and right hat switches as trim for my rudders. Sometimes when you're flying in a bit of a crosswind, it's easy to get blown off course. You use rudder trim to correct that, so you don't have to keep constant adjustment or pressure on the yoke, and it just makes piloting easier. Left hat switch for rudder left and right hat switch for trim rudder right. We're done. Apply and save, and let's now put everything to the test to see if it's working correctly. And we're back in our 152. First of all, my quick view left and right using the POV. That's working fine. And now I'm going to press the POV forward and then back again. This is the next and previous pilot position we configured, and very useful on difficult landings when you want to look over the dashboard. Now using my hat switch, I'm pushing it up to instrument view 1, and then I'll push it down to cycle through the various instrument views. We haven't configured reset cockpit view yet, so just hit the control and space bar. We'll be doing that shortly. Now let's go to the external view, button B1, and we can test our quick views. First of all to the left, hold the button to maintain the view. Now to the right, now pressing the POV forward, and that gives me the top-down view, and lastly the rear view, which means we're looking at the front of the aircraft. That's all good. Back into the cockpit we can go. I just want to do a quick test on the brakes that we set up, so I'm just going to hide the yoke to make it easier. Parking brake off, and I'm just going to advance the throttle a little bit to get us going. We're starting to move, so a great opportunity just to test those rudders that we put in earlier. They're all working fine. And now the right brake, and I should swing to the right, which I am. Left brake, that's working fine. And now pressing both brakes should bring me to a stop, which it has. All good here. And now to set up the controls on the right hand of our yoke. Just a quick tip, if you're not sure whether or not you have configured a particular button, search by input and press the button, and it'll come up and tell you anything that is configured to that particular button or key. We're going to start with POV2, we're back to our camera, and also cockpit camera. We've already set up our quick views, now we want to set up our free look. Scroll down until you find look up, look right, left and down. I'm going to start with look up, so I'm going to select the box, and then I'll start scanning, and I'm going to press the POV button up. validate, and now to complete the remainder of the views. Don't choose the views that show lockable. This is my look right, so press the POV to the right, and now to do the left key for the look left function. Validate that, and all that remains is now look down. There it is. I'll select that and pressing the POV button down, and then once again validate. Our free look is done. I'm not going to set up any external views for this button, but of course you're free to do so. For button B2, I'm going to allocate Reset Cockpit View. This is button 10 on the Xbox, and this will reset our view to the default pilot view. You'll find this very useful and using it fairly often. I'm finished with the POV now, and now on to Hat Switch 2. And for the left and right functions, I'm going to choose Aileron Trim, both left and right. Aileron Trim is very useful in a crosswind or perhaps to counter some engine torque, and just helps prevent a slow bank left or right. So our Hat Switch 1 is set for rudder, and our Hat Switch 2 is set for aileron. There we are, we're done. And now we're moving on to the only setting we're going to do for the quad. PC users will have to change device, but it's included here as it will always be a default setting. We're going to set up the trim wheel under flight control surfaces and control trimming surfaces, and it must be set to elevator trim axis -100 to 100%. Check the box, start scanning, and then move the trim wheel. On the Xbox it records as axis 11, validate, and now we can see the axis bar is shown there, a slight movement of the trim wheel, and the bar should move accordingly. That all looks good. Time for another quick test in the cockpit. We'll start with POV2 free look, and it should allow us to freely look around in any direction in the cockpit, and the view will not reset. I'm now going to press button B2 to reset our view to the default pilot view, and that's worked perfectly. Now a quick test of the trim wheel, and that is not right. When I roll up, the trim wheel in the cockpit's moving down. But as we did before, we know that's a fairly easy problem to fix, and I'm going to uncheck the reverse axis. Apply and save, and I can go back into the sim and give it a test. And now when I move the trim wheel up, it's moving up in the cockpit. That's sorted. We'll check our rudder and aileron trim in our final flight test. We're nearly done with the yoke configuration. All that remains is for us to set up some of the buttons. There's the A, B, X and Y buttons, and the two buttons flanking the Xbox logo. The one to the left I call the pages icon, and the one to the right I call the hamburger icon. The center button is not configurable. That's the tray with the arrow in. The first one I'll set up is the hamburger key. Go to menu, and under menu we're looking for toggle pause. And once configured, when we hit that key it will enable us to exit the sim to the sub-menus, so we can change settings if we want to. Validate that, that's done. And now to set up the pages key. And to do that I'm going to go to radio, and then I'm going to page down until I find Display ATC. And by pressing this button, it will bring up the ATC menu when I need it. You can, of course, configure this to checklists or anything that you would prefer. So I press the button. It's recorded as button 7, validate, and we're done. And all that remains is the A, B, X and Y key. And I'm going to use this for autopilot. To find what I want quickly, I've used the search by name function and typed in toggle autopilot. And I'm going to set up the A key as toggle autopilot master. Press it once and the autopilot will come on. Press it again and the autopilot will come off. For the B key I'm going to use toggle autopilot heading hold. And for the X key I'm going to use altitude hold. I'm not going to configure the Y key, although in my personal configuration I use that to flip in and out of VR. And we're done with the yoke, and these are my suggested or recommended settings for the yoke. That will apply to all the future profiles that we'll do. If you prefer something else, well, feel free to change them. But all that remains for us to do now is a final test. First of all, the B1 key for external view, and now I can check my elevators, ailerons and rudder. They seem to be fine, and now to check the quick views. Left, right, rear and forward. External's okay, so back into the cockpit. Let me check change pilot position. Back and forward. That's fine. And now for the quick views, first left and then right. That's good. And now for hat switch 1, instrument view 1. Next. That's all working great. B2 key to return me to the pilot's position. Now let's check POV 2 with the free look. That all looks okay. And once again the B2 key to return me back to the default view. Now an internal check on my yoke and my rudders. Now this aircraft doesn't have a visible rudder trim, but it does have an aileron trim, which is left and right on my hat 2 switch. Obviously these are fine movements, but I can see that it is moving slowly. Not sure if you'll pick it up in the video or not. As we haven't set up the quad yet, I'm having to do a few things manually. Parking brake off, and I'm just going to advance the throttle a little bit, just so that we start to move down the runway. And here I can check my rudders and my brakes. Now pressing both left and right bumper buttons, and it should bring me to a stop, which it does. So that's all working. Well, it's time for a takeoff. I've manually advanced my throttle to full and holding myself aligned with the runway with the rudder, and rotate, and we're up. Now climbing nicely, trim wheel is working well. Now time to test the autopilot. Autopilot is on. Now I've chosen heading select, and the aircraft is turning and reacting exactly as it should. And now altitude hold. Pressing those buttons again will take off, altitude hold, heading and autopilot and so on. Now that we're up on cruise, I can check the hamburger button on the joystick, and that should take me to the menus, which it does. That's fine. Now to push the pages button, and that brings up the ATC as expected. Press it again and it takes it away. And this brings us to a conclusion of our part 1 for the VeloctiyOne flight controller for Xbox and PC. And as mentioned earlier, part 2 will include configuration guides for various types of aircraft for the Xbox and a separate one for the PC. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of this type of thing. Thank you very much for joining me today. I trust you found it useful and informative. Stay well, look after yourselves, see you soon, and bye for now.